And without further ado, I would like to welcome to the stage John Broadbeck from EDP Renewables. He is going to lead us through a very exciting panel on regional transmission organizations and how we can all work together to grow clean energy on the grid. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Jana. This is sort of an exciting thing, doing clean power from the back bedroom of Schloss Broadbeck here in Langhorne, and hopefully we're going to have a great panel in the next hour. As we have a series of panelists, I'm going to ask them to give us a minute introduction on them and what they're doing. We have from PJM, Asim Haque, who is the Vice President of State and Member Services at PJM. Asim, you have an opening comment?
Yeah, hi John, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, wonderful. Well, hello to everybody out there. As John mentioned, my name is Asim Haque. I head up two divisions at PJM. One is state policy, which is really sort of the crux of what we're talking about here, and the integration of state policy and all things RTO, especially markets, as well as member services, which is our sort of outward-facing as well as inward-facing interactions with all of our members, including, if you've ever heard of the PJM stakeholder process, it's like a mini Game of Thrones, so come check it out sometime. But I'm happy to be here with all of you and excited to participate in the panel today. Thank you.
Thank you, Asim. I know the PJM stakeholder process well. Because of quarantine, I'm down 15 pounds. From Maryland, I have Michael Richard, who is a commissioner at the Maryland Public Service Commission. Michael?
Well, good afternoon, and thank you so much for the invitation. Your members are very important to the success of Maryland's environmental and renewable energy goals. So it really is a privilege to be able to address this group today. As you said, I'm a commissioner at the state of Maryland for the State of Maryland Public Service Commission. I'll be starting my second term in July 1st, second 5-year term. Before that, I had the privilege and honor to serve my governor as a deputy chief of staff. And during Bob Ehrlich's administration, I served Maryland as director of the Maryland Energy Administration. So again, very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. And from Kentucky, we were expected Talina Matthews, but she unfortunately has had a family emergency that has taken her away from this panel. She is, of course, the chair of OPSI, the organization of PJM States. And in her place, is that the right expression? But in her stead, let's say, is Kent Chandler, who's the executive director of the Kentucky PSC or PUC. I'm going to get it wrong either way.
Sorry, PSC. Thanks, John.
Very good.
Yeah, so I'll try to stand in the best I can for Commissioner Matthews, who regretfully can't be here today. I don't know that I can fill her shoes. I'm just a lowly executive director, and she's got 20 years of industry experience and a PhD in economics. So I'll do my best here. I'm the executive director. I run the staff, but I'm also the point person for the commission here in Kentucky on wholesale and RTO issues. We're a little unique. We regulate a lot of entities that other state commissions may not, like distribution cooperatives and public water. And so the RTO interests are not always at the forefront of what the commission's doing any day. But I look forward to being part of this and providing maybe a little bit of insight into the vertically integrated state perspective.
Thanks, Kent. And finally, or I hate to say finally, but Greg Poulos, who is the executive director of CAPS, the consumer advocates organization within the PJM stakeholder process. Greg, I'll let you have a few minutes.
Great, thank you, John. I appreciate it, and thank you to WEA for letting me participate. We certainly always enjoy the relationship with wind and renewable resources. Are certainly some of our best allies in the PJM footprint. So as executive director of CAPS, the Consumer Advocates of PJM States, is in the energy world, there has to be an acronym, and CAPS was really how this started. So I have 16 members. There are 13 states in PJM, and the District of Columbia, so 14 jurisdictions. And I actually have 2 of those states have 2 state advocate offices. Now, the state advocates there's only 14 of them are members of PJM, and I help all 16 with making sure they're informed on what's going on in PJM, that they're engaged when they need to be, and help them with participation for those 14 that can vote as members. So I am certainly the eyes and ears for them as much as I can be. And I think, like the rest of the panelists say, obviously these are my opinions and not theirs. As a CAPS group, we rarely speak as a group because it has to be unanimous. It's something very hard to do with my 16 advocate offices and the different levels of engagement they have. Thanks.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, having to wrestle 16 organizations to agree to something must be a challenge. So my first question to the group is also going to be a question to the audience, and it's a polling question that you'll see on the Slido app that you've been using. And it's, back at the end of December when the MOPR order came out, I thought that until the middle of the year, that would be the only thing I was worried about. And as it turns out, other things have intervened. The COVID-19 has, completely altered the landscape economically. The last 4 days, we've had, actions in major cities that, I don't want to go there because the dust is still settling there. So how do you think getting relief of MOPR problems stand within your states versus the issue of getting the economy back on its feet, resolving the COVID-19 crisis? I'd be happy to hear from any of you, but Mr. Richard, maybe you're the best to start with Maryland today.
Well, yeah, thank you for that question. And I'm not sure it's really a matter of trying to rank or prioritize. I mean, we're facing a lot, as you pointed out, as a nation. We need to confront and resolve the racial biases that are endemic in our justice system. We must keep people safe during this pandemic and rapidly work to find a vaccine for the coronavirus. But we also need to be good stewards of the planet, continue to be good stewards of the planet, and continue to address climate change. And all of these are very critical issues, even existential, and they all must be addressed. So this MOPR is fraught with problems, but its potential impact on states' efforts to address climate change are of considerable concern, particularly for us in Maryland. It's particularly a concern for our offshore wind plans. And as a restructured state, we are appalled that FERC is now, in its rehearing, from its rehearing clarification order, has declared that default service, in Maryland we call it standard offer service, is being deemed a state subsidy. So this is going to impair our ability to secure affordable electricity for the majority of Maryland households. Now, I'm sure you've heard plenty of time from other Maryland state officials, particularly our chairman, Jason Stanek. And I'll repeat, this is an unprecedented federal intrusion on the state's rights to choose its energy resources portfolio. And it's premised on a faulty notion, a notion that states were suppressing market prices, which FERC never proved. But the consequence is that our citizens will be paying more. They will not be getting the clean energy that they are demanding, but they're going to be paying more for the fossil fuels that they're trying to replace, which I think is an unfair windfall for generators. So directly to your question, this MOPR is of considerable interest and concern by members of our legislature, our Attorney General's office, and by our governor. Our environmental priorities will remain in place. We will in Maryland need to make a decision about what is best to support our environmental goals and what is best for our state's electric customers.
Thank you very much. Greg, you have sort of a wide-ranging view of the consumer advocates and their relationships to their state governments. What's your reaction to COVID-19 versus MOPR?
Yeah, I think it's great that you started with Commissioner Richard, because certainly his state's on the one end of the spectrum with respect to the MOPR, because the default service auctions impact them as a restructured state, and renewable aspect and the ability to accommodate state resources are certainly two of the two drivers, and he's got both of them. New Jersey's in that category, and so is District of Columbia. And then there's a number of states that are regulated that don't have the impact of the MOPR. But overall, to your question of MOPR versus coronavirus, I don't think it's close. I think the MOPR is for the most part a backseat, a second priority, let's put it that way, to the coronavirus. Coronavirus is just impacting everything in such crazy ways. But the MOPR, I think that really where the MOPR is the biggest concern right now are those states that have the default service auctions, those restructured states, and because of the capacity, the compliance filings that are going on now, and trying to work with PJM, who's been very good at helping the states try and find a way to figure out how to go have those default service auctions in those restructured states. So that's the one thing that would maybe raise the issue a little higher for some of the states, but that's only like 3 or 4.
Okay, thanks. Kent, what's the view out in Kentucky?
Yeah, so John, I would say that it hasn't changed given coronavirus. The MOPR was never going to be the financial impact to Kentucky like it was going to be likely to other states. So we've always ensured that our staff is safe and that we're trying to ensure that the provision of retail service is done safely, ensuring that members of the utility going out and disconnecting or going out and doing service runs to folks, that they're able to do that in a safe manner. And so our focus certainly has been on how we continue to regulate our utilities at the retail level throughout the COVID pandemic. So I would say that the MOPR was always just playing the proverbial second fiddle to us just doing our daily job, but that has been the case. I would say for Kentucky, I think we understand what Commissioner Richard's saying about the impact on Maryland. The impact on Kentucky was always going to be a long-term impact, taking away optionality. I've explained that the frustration with MOPR in Kentucky has not necessarily been financial, but it's just been sort of an annoyance, right? That we never restructured, right? We've had a way of regulating utilities since the PSC's inception. And for some reason, a few months ago, the FERC has found that the way we've been doing something for 85 or 90 years is somehow a state subsidy. And so I think that because of it being seen as more of an annoyance that as an impact to the day-to-day, it has taken that back seat and probably will continue to do so.
Thanks very much. Asim, I know that PJM's got a much different role in this environment, and they've taken some extreme measures with respect to COVID-19. But I was wondering if you'd weigh in on where, even within PJM, or where you think MOPR versus COVID lies in the larger world.
Yeah, thanks for the question, John. So when I initially spoke, I asked if you could hear me. Can you see me? It has become eerily dark as a result of a storm here in Pennsylvania. So can you see me okay?
You look great.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so wonderful question. I would say, look, at PJM and I've heard this soundbite even when I was a regulator in Ohio, but keeping the lights on is really job one. And I have now seen it on the ground. I'm working with PJM during this pandemic. And you're right, we have taken very serious precautions to try and keep our control room safe for our operators. We constructed a third control room out of an existing training facility, and we've made the very difficult decision to sequester some of our operators. We're studying load-related issues extensively, and we are holding actually standing meetings with our state community and our members to discuss these analyses and a myriad of issues related to COVID-19, some of which I don't think will actually sort of sprout up until later on as we do some analysis surrounding load and what the resulting impacts are going to be to our economy. This by no way, though, minimizes the importance of the MOPR order, for which PJM, on rehearing in its compliance filing, has fully acknowledged the difficulty that the order creates for states trying to advance their policy initiatives, and has worked hard to try and work with our states in our compliance filing endeavors, especially on this default service related issue. But these are very, very unique times. We are intensely focused on keeping the lights on during this pandemic, while also working hard on the myriad of issues that were already occurring at PJM before a pandemic hitting, including the MOPR, which is also an extraordinarily important subject.
Thank you, Asim. I think I'm going to stick with you, if you don't mind, on this next question I have, which is, so the MOPR came out almost universally reviled, and a lot of people have started to challenge it in court. And I was just wondering, from PJM's standpoint, do you have even the capability of challenging it in court if you wanted to? Where do you stand on other people potentially challenging it in court? And what's your likelihood, or what's the timing, and how does it delay PJM's actions?
Yeah, so PJM is a public utility that is regulated by the FERC. And so when our regulator says, thou shalt comply with whatever it is that they've asked us to comply with, then we have to take measures to try and comply with those orders. Now, obviously on compliance, there's definitely input that we've wanted to receive, which we've received quite a bit of input. We've really worked hard to try and work with our stakeholders on compliance. But I think that is, that's something that I wanted to make sure to cite, because I have had inquiries come in from states and members saying, effectively, why don't you just not submit a compliance filing, for instance? And unfortunately, just based upon the regulatory paradigm that we operate in, that is not an option. We respect the decisions made to challenge the orders in venues outside of the FERC. Right now, our focus, though, is on trying to appropriately comply with the FERC's mandate, but also listening to our stakeholders to ensure that, in our states, to ensure that we have done what we can do to incorporate their concerns into compliance.
Thank you. I have nothing to add to that, but other than saying, Greg, if you could give us a quick overview of where the states stand, or the consumer advocates. I've seen individual consumer advocates begin to make challenges in court.
Yeah, so this is it's a good question. It's a good example to show the split between the advocate offices. There are 7 states within PJM that are regulated just like Kentucky. And those states, the capacity construct really doesn't impact them in any measurable way, in any meaningful way. Virginia, somewhat. So they're kind of on the edge. But for the most part, there are a few states that are really concerned about the impacts it could have, particularly because of the renewables and the renewable goals. And those would be New Jersey, D.C., and I filed New Jersey, D.C., Maryland, and I believe Delaware has filed challenges, primarily because of the renewable concerns and their rights have their resources accommodated in the PJM construct. And Illinois, I don't think challenged, but I know that there was some concerns, and I don't believe challenged either. But those are the states that were most concerned about their right to accommodate their resources and their resource mix within their state.
Thanks, Greg. Kent, the chairman of the commission in DC, is a native son, I guess, of Kentucky. What's the view from Kentucky on potential for challenge of this, or operation, or I mean, you're all state subsidized. All your resources are suddenly state subsidized, right?
Yeah, we're in this weird place. We have 3 utilities that are members of PJM, 2 are FRR, and a third is an RPM member, but they just so happen to be a member-owned G&T electric cooperative. So we kind of had this nuanced look at it anyways, right? So if prices did go up, that would ultimately be good for that G&T, because the more money they're able to make, they're going to return it to their customers, actually. And then lo and behold, FERC decided to do an about face that self-supply, they get an exemption for anything has cleared to now, but moving forward there will be no self-supply exemption. So even the one upside we could have, we got burned on effectively. So I don't know how much Chairman Chatterjee, being from Kentucky, worked to our benefit, I'll say. We are not going to be active in the appeal. I do anticipate that we will play some sort of role, probably on the sidelines in an amicus fashion, arguing about the fact that states do have the power in the Federal Power Act to determine their own resource mix, and that we think this was an overreach.
Very good. I'm going to ask Commissioner Richard from Maryland. I'm sure that you don't view this as an overreach.
Yes, I think we've stated that very, very definitively. Given the Federal Power Act and even constitutional issues, the way it treats state and federal initiatives and initiatives, we and our Commission is very interested, our Energy Administration is interested, and our Attorney General is very interested in this. So the Commission, we have filed a statement of issues jointly with New Jersey and the DC circuits.
Okay, Commissioner, I'm going to stay with you, I think, and ask another question, which is, there are different resource mixes, and there are different preferred resource mixes in individual states. And the coastal states have started looking toward offshore wind as an option. When you look at the MOPR rates, offshore wind is well out of the MOPR market. Other states are protecting coal industries, and other states, live in areas where onshore wind or solar might be available. Does Maryland view the differential impacts of MOPR as a problem within PJM?
Well, yes. I mean, it is a fact that there's a lot of diversity among the PJM states, but we have been very successful in largely being united in opposition to the MOPR, largely because we're agreeing it's an unlawful intrusion on states' authority to choose their resources. But I would also say there is a growing demand for clean energy, clean renewable energy in the PJM footprint. I think it's a PJM slide. It said by 2030, PJM states' current requirements will require about 30 gigawatts of clean energy. So I believe this is more an issue that unites PJM states than divides us. And I could get into some of the other initiatives that are out there, but number of our states are a member, 4 of our states are a member of the 10-state regional alliance using the RGGI. We've also, a number of us are members of the U.S. Climate Alliance. I think I wrote them down here, like Delaware, Illinois, Michigan, New Jersey, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Virginia, which is an alliance committed, joining 24 other states that are committed to the Paris Accord. So I guess the point really is that there is a lot that unites us within PJM, even as we have different resources. I think a lot of our states, majority of our states, are moving to decarbonize at different rates. But I think the whole point in telling you all this is we really need PJM support for state policies because we're going to need a lot more renewables in the PJM footprint. And what FERC is doing, in the words of its own orders, is to disregard and nullify our state policies. And I use that because that's the reason FERC gives for not using the MOPR mitigation mechanism against federal policies. So this is a great concern. And again, I believe that's why we're largely united on the issue of opposing MOPR.
John, did we lose you?
I guess I left him speechless.
Well,
I think Kent was going to be up next.
I was going to say, I'll go ahead while we wait for John. I'll just say on this issue, the reality is that some states care what color their megawatt hour is, right? That there are a number of states that want green energy. You know, I think there were two ways to go about it. You either accommodate it, or you tell them good luck doing something else. You're only going to get ordinary fungible black megawatt hours, right? The only way forward is to accommodate somehow. And I think FERC's made it fairly clear that they want to make sure that the actions of states don't impact the market prices of everybody else. I think there has to be a middle way here. And there has to be some way that people can get the green megawatt hours that they desire, the states that desire them, without there being what FERC, I guess, determined is some sort of cost shift. I don't know if they were very clear about that, but I can only imagine that was what was underpinning their idea. I just didn't necessarily see that evidence in the record, but I just think there has to be a way forward. So I fully expect that my personal point of view is by the time the litigation over MOPR is over, we'll probably have some sort of other construct by then. So we're willing to sit down and work towards it, and I hope everybody else is as well.
Greg?
So I'll go next. So the resource mix, as John was mentioning, we have a very diverse resource mix within the region, and that does create some tension. From an advocate position, whatever your beliefs are, whatever you support, renewable, clean energy, all those things, that kind of takes a back seat when your legislature, and this has really been clear with the accommodation and MOPR and some of the state actions for subsidies, it kind of takes a back seat when your state legislation says this is what our resource mix is going to have to accommodate. So, for example, in Ohio, it doesn't matter what the Consumer Advocate's Office wants the resource mix when once the legislation makes that decision, the legislatures make that decision, and there could be significant consequences for cost for customers based on those decisions. So there is an important aspect, but it really does focus, the resource mix really is a legislature's position. Asim, I think you did a great job with that in Ohio when you were the chairman, of saying, legislators, you make that decision on the resource and we'll figure out what to do from there. I would say, though, that the PJM markets, the PJM capacity market, the current one, that before we have this MOPR going into effect, has done such a great job of creating innovation from demand response to really natural gas. I've asked this question for years. Do you think some other constructs would have put natural gas, given natural gas the platform to become such an incredible resource within this region? And I really think that's because of the competitive construct that PJM created. The question now is, with some uncertainty going forward, are we going to have that, or are people going to be driven away from the market, for example, towards the fixed resource requirement, FRRs?
Yeah, so I think I round out this question. My hope is that John's back, but you guys, all of you have made excellent comments here, and I don't have a lot to add. Let me just say that we have a very diverse footprint, if you haven't been able to tell, even on this panel, and we view that as a strength. I view that as a strength. It's actually kind of a wonderful microcosm of the country at large and the diversity of thought that exists within our country in the energy space. And I think that it creates challenges, certainly for PJM, because when you think about where PJM is effectively situated in this, trying to homogenize various market priorities to advance particular fuel types or technologies, without resulting in detriment to others, is really one of the challenges here. And so I think if you actually look at our compliance filing, what we've really worked hard to do is to try to do our best to accommodate as many of our state's policies as we can through a combination of sort of exemption parameters that were crafted in that compliance filing, as well as net cone and net ACR values that exist within that compliance filing. But it doesn't necessarily, so the hope is that we kind of get through collectively this kind of MOPR phase, this MOPR iteration of the capacity market. Getting through this iteration doesn't necessarily solve that larger problem that I identified, which is, how do you sort of homogenize all of these different market priorities within one larger construct? And it's certainly something that PJM is taking a look at internally, as well as a number of stakeholders who have either ideas or have commissioned their own studies to determine what that marketplace could potentially look like. John, do we have you back?
I am back, which just shows that, Sadie and Katie interrupt a lot more power than resource adequacy does. So obviously I've lost my spot, but taking a clue from Asim about where he was, so we all live in the PJM environment. The markets have done good things for power prices, for resource diversity, a lot of positives. Are there any preferred changes that are in the future that you'd like to see come to PJM? Obviously, New York has put a lot of stake in carbon pricing as a potential a future world for them, and they've been making moves in New York ISO. Is that something that's in PJM's future? Is it an expansion of RGGI? Are there changes that have to be done to the capacity market beyond MOPR that allows the PJM markets to flourish? Since I've absolutely lost track, I'll let anyone start this this round of question.
I'll take this one, John. So I'm going to not touch carbon pricing, if you don't mind. I will say, and I'm glad that Commissioner Richard is here. I will say that during the MOPR discussions, I guess on effectively remand to PJM to come up with some alternatives. I guess this was maybe in late 2018. Maryland staff had actually a fairly interesting idea, which was some sort of competitive carve out, but with a two-stage auction where anybody that needed a particular number of green megawatts can put in and get the number of green megawatts on the capacity side that they need in an initial auction, and then the remainder of their capacity needs in a second competitive auction. I think that something like that effectively holds harmless those states that care most about reliability and don't have any legislative mandates on the renewable side. But still allow for those states that have chosen to have a different resource mix, accommodating both of those sides. I think ideas like that should have merit moving forward in the discussion.
Thanks. I'm going to go to Commissioner Richard, I think.
Great, thank you for that question. This is I'm not even sure where to start with this question because all of our suggestions were ignored or rejected by FERC. But obviously, we were greatly disappointed when FERC did not, retracted, I guess, any accommodation measures, such as the fixed resource requirement alternative, which was suggested in the April 2018 order. But and it's already been mentioned, something that we worked on with OPSI, the organization of PJM States, was the competitive carve-out auction, which we thought would have been a truly market-based approach that would have provided the states with renewable resources they wanted in a just and reasonable manner. However, that was not even considered. In fact, it was pretty much ignored by FERC. So obviously, we're making a lot of decisions. We're looking at where we are. Obviously, we're waiting to see what the final compliance filing looks like. But in some of the near-term issues, again, just how, on default service, we've really appreciated PJM looking at that issue and coming up with, I think, a very sensible approach. So hopefully, that will be accommodated our default service. Also, just the state's approach on transmission, because that could be another way that states can help incentivize their preferred resources. So other than that, other than a major do-over, I can kind of see it's hard to salvage this order at this point. And I suppose, a discussion with PJM about disbanding the capacity market or a significant overhaul could make the whole MOPR issue, moot. But even under that circumstance, we'd have to figure out how we continue to advance our clean energy projects, such as offshore wind.
Okay, awesome. Before I give you a chance to respond to that, I'm going to ask Greg Polis, who's deeply involved with the stakeholder process, if he has any ideas of current initiatives or things that could mitigate the impacts of MOPR.
It's a good question. I think there's a lot of the MOPR order hasn't even implemented yet, and there's already thoughts about, okay, what do we do now, or what do we do? Carbon pricing. There is a carbon pricing discussion going on, but the carbon pricing discussion is kind of strange because I think there's a clear understanding that PJM doesn't have the ability to implement a carbon pricing without states taking some kind of action. So it's a weird place to be. I would simply say, though, that something clearly needs to be done. I raised this even last summer at the Midwest Governors Association meeting, and Commissioner Richard pointed out earlier, we have, by 2029, we're going to have 27 gigawatts of wind resources that are based on RPS standards. And right now we're at 17 gigawatts based on the RPS in different states. So that means we have 10 gigawatts coming on of wind. What are we going to do with it? And there's not an answer right now. And I raised that question a year ago. I don't think it's been answered. I don't know where we go to figure that answer, except for, as Commissioner Richard pointed out, that maybe we do need to look at a construct to how to address that, particularly when, as of June 1st, just 2 days ago, the PJM region and the capacity constructs went to a 26% reserve margin. That is the highest, at least in recent memory. So we have a lot of excess resources there. We have a lot more coming on. And it's certainly coming to a point where why are we paying for all these resources, and how do we make it work in the most efficient way? And from a stakeholder process, we're already starting to think about that. Fantastic, Greg. If we're building all those additional wind, I'm sure you all know, hopefully EDP Renewables is building a significant portion of that. Awesome. If I could let you give the PJM response here.
Yeah, sure. So quite a bit to unpack there. First, with respect to carbon pricing, we continue to assert that PJM is not trying to devise a carbon price. It's trying to create a venue within our stakeholder process to effectively explore, if a state decides to implement carbon pricing, how does that implementation actually work within the energy marketplace? And so we're exploring concepts like leakage, like border adjustments. Within the confines of that task force, there is, I would say tepid support for that task force. It is, again, I suppose, hyper technical in what we're trying to accomplish within that task force. But again, a venue that we've got some I would say some very good educational opportunities. There's a technical conference that will be advanced at the FERC here in the near term regarding carbon pricing. Well, at least the request has been made. I don't know if it will be advanced. So, more intrigue regarding carbon pricing and where it's situated sort of in the market construct, specifically the energy market. But look, I think from PJM's perspective, we're trying to take a pretty measured approach about this. And at least initially, we've got to get through, per Greg Polis's point, we've got to get through this period of what does the capacity market look like under this MOPR construct, meaning we just submitted our second compliance filing on Monday. We haven't yet received an order on certainly not the second compliance filing, but the first compliance filing either. okay, there is a lot of work that will then have to be undertaken by PJM to prepare itself for the BRA under this iteration of the capacity market. And so from working in the policy space, what I've really tried to do is work with our stakeholders and work with our states and our technical folks to try and intake as much feedback as possible. And the default service issue is a really good example of that. We advanced some initial language and initial proposal, and it frankly received a pretty lukewarm response. And so we frankly gutted it, and we started from the beginning trying to work with our states and our members that were very concerned about that language. So again, the goal is to try and get through this period of the iteration of the capacity market that is MOPR based. And then once we understand really what we're dealing with, because until the FERC actually issues orders on compliance, it's very hard to know specifically what we're dealing with, what resources are going to be challenged within this iteration of the capacity market. I think then we need to be thinking about, and we need to be open to having a discussion surrounding the next iteration of the capacity market. And I think, that's something that we have said that, we are open to. But again, I think we're trying to take a measured approach at this, sort of tackle one thing at a time as it comes. But certainly to Commissioner Richards' point, and to other points that have been made here, we at PJM, while taking a measured approach, understand that there's got to be further examination of this.
Thank you, Asim. I think that's a terrific response, and it leads me to another topic when we're talking about restructuring the capacity market. One of the options that was left was the FRR option, the fixed resource requirement option, and a couple of states have kicked that off, especially states that have pretty solid renewable goals, and those who have contracted for offshore wind in particular are pursuing at least a look at that. And I'd like to go to Commissioner Richard. I've been hitting you a lot on that first response, Commissioner. I apologize for that. Hopefully you won't hold that against me or my company further in front of you. But wonder if you had any thoughts about the FRR and where it goes and what the process would look like.
Yeah, I think Maryland's been pretty outspoken. I think there's a lot of unity at the commission that the FRR is an option. We will consider it, but as Asim just pointed out, we still haven't seen what FERC is going to accept. So we need to have that information to inform our decision. The independent market monitor did provide us a report, and it also gave us valuable information, and we certainly appreciated that. There's been people who are very concerned about some of the assumptions and parameters that were in that report, and while we may not agree, particularly it may not value the environmental benefits of carbon-free energy as we do, and doesn't consider the opposite, the costs of carbon. So anyway, it does give us some ideas of the questions we need to ask once we have all the information. As I stated earlier, Maryland is going to remain committed to its environmental policies. So we will all need to work inside our state. This is going to be a decision not just made by the commission. It's been argued that we have a fair amount of authority on that front, but because of it's such a big issue, such a big decision, this is my view that we would definitely need to have the input of our legislature and our leaders in the legislature and our executive branch. So anyway, I might add that also with the RPM, it's the continuous changes that have made it difficult over the years to sustain state policies. Our environmental policy programs are, of course, based on the programs that exist at the time that they're created. And then it seems that so often the rug just gets pulled out from underneath us. The example would include like the sudden creation of capacity performance, which adversely impacted our demand response programs, the undervaluing of our energy efficiency programs, and which often leads to overprocurement of capacity. And now with this MOPR and the recent reserve pricing order, it's just hard to set and design programs around ever-changing RPM rules. So it may be that another argument for opting out is trying to have some consistency so states can move forward and work to achieve and succeed with their environmental policies.
Thank you, Commissioner. The old trader in me will advocate for consistency of policy 100% of the time. Kent, you mentioned in one of your comments that Kentucky had an FRR entity in it, and has there been any peculiar outcomes or good or bad elements of that relationship that you can point to?
So yeah, so we have an AEP affiliate in Kentucky, and I think the AEP East is entirely all of their operating companies are FRR across PJM, and then we have a Duke Energy subsidiary here that basically shares a contiguous territory with Duke, Ohio, and the Cincinnati area, and they've both been FRRs effectively since they joined PJM. It works well for us because we continue to get the value, our customers continue to get the value of a competitive energy market while continuing to just be self-supply, right? Be vertically integrated as it relates to capacity. And so the value proposition has always been there for their membership as FRR. I think the concern we have moving forward is before I came to the commission, I was one of Greg's members to the Kentucky AG's office, and I can tell you when the FRR conversation happened, there were a lot of advocate offices that were actively involved in PJM, looking around saying, "What's FRR?" I think that was the case for some states, right? It was one of a lot of people were FRR. It was just not really talked about much. It was never a focus, and I have a concern that as the FRR becomes at least a more popular option for folks, those that may have had a concern about the competitiveness of RPM may start pushing back on some of the rules and parameters that apply to FRR, and lack of a better term, maybe ruin that too. And so that's something that we're going to be actively guarding against.
Thanks very much. Greg, one of the confusing parts to me about FRR is the impact on customers, and especially customers that have rights to access. Any reaction from consumer advocates on the conversation about FRR?
I think we definitely miss Kent in the consumer advocate world, because he was such an involved member and someone who was always looking to learn so much. So the FRR discussion really, as Kent kind of pointed out, so many of the jurisdictions like, what is this? How does it work? And we had to have a lot of questions, a lot of discussions. PJM was really good about helping us figure it out. As to cost and concerns, there is definitely a concern. The Market Monitor has put together some FRR projections for New Jersey, Maryland, Illinois, and they are, for the most part, there's a range, but most of them kind of suggest there's going to have higher prices. So you're going to be able to have more choice in your resources, but most likely you're going to have higher prices because of that. So you're going to lose, and the whole overall market for the advocates in general is a little concerned if there's a lot of folks who go FRR. It's not going to destroy anything. PJM will be fine, but it will eliminate a pretty competitive aspect of the PJM markets, and one of the hallmarks, I think, of the PJM markets. I think Commissioner Richard made a great point. I hadn't really thought of it in that context before, though, that there's more kind of growing support for the certainty that comes with the FRR, which is a little disappointing. It's always been the case that the PJM capacity market has had almost a change a year. To mention like the capacity performance was a major one. This is obviously a very major change, but there's been almost a change a year. A lot of them directed at DR over the years, but it's until kind of this kind of freeze because of the MOPR. There's one a year. The other thing I did want to mention on the FRR, just so folks can appreciate this, is that we have, we do, as Kent mentioned, AEP is an FRR and Duke is an FRR. Those are your two FRRs within the PJM region, and AEP is in 7 states. So it has a significant reach on the FRR construct. Ohio, AEP is in Ohio, but that AEP Ohio is not part of their FRR. It's every state but every AEP state but them. So like your Michigan, your Indiana, your Kentucky, your West Virginia, your Tennessee, and your Virginia all have FRR aspects. So it's a significant part of the PJM footprint is already within a FRR construct.
Thanks, Greg. And I guess Asim, lots of talk about FRR. It's, at one point, FRR was viewed as a repudiation of PJM. Where is PJM about the potential for, load moving to the FRR? Does it imperil, to use a dramatic word, the rest of the RPM market?
Yeah. So first, let me say that state policy evolves. We have to evolve with our states. And my hope is that our rehearing request, our attempts on compliance reflect that. And I think where PJM management is situated is we want to try and be supportive of our states as they advance their policy initiatives. Addressing FRR specifically. So look, our preference is that, again, we take a very measured approach here, and that's why I went through that entire dynamic in the previous answer. We take a very measured approach here, and that states not immediately jump to FRR. Now, there have been a lot of good that have been realized through PJM markets, and I know we've got to pinpoint that we're specifically talking about the capacity market, whether it's a reduction in costs or a reduction in emissions. As we sit here today, a lot of good has been done for consumers through these market constructs. At the same time, the FRR is an option that exists under our current tariff structure. And if states decide they want to examine this option, we are going to assist them in that examination. And all we can hope for is that that decision is fully informed, because it's a very serious decision. At least as the rubric exists today, it means that you're effectively, out of the capacity market for 5 years if FRR is elected. Whatever the zone identified is out for 5 years. At the same time, again, if states decide they want to examine FRR, we are here to provide all of the assistance necessary for states to make those informed decisions. We are participating in the docket that's in New Jersey right now. Our filing in that docket is effectively here are the parameters of FRR. And so we are here for our states if they decide that that's an option that they want to try and advance.
Good. Thank you for that. We're at about 4 or 5 minutes away from the end of this panel. If I'd like to invite any audience members to chat in any questions they might have. Going back to the original question, it appears that maybe, oops, I'm looking at the wrong question there. We'll worry about the original question. So, closing. This is 6 months ago, PJM had non-just and reasonable capacity market and energy market. We've gotten a MOPR order, which supposedly moves us a long step toward J&R on the capacity market. And we have just gotten the order on the energy market on the ORDC, the Operational Reserve Demand Curve. Does anyone view ORDC as having a comparable impact at the states as did MOPR? I'll go to Greg there.
Yeah, so there's just so much going on right now. This is certainly since really December, things have just caught on fire within the PJM region. And I think as a backdrop, you have to also remember that in 2019, PJM and its energy market had its lowest prices ever, historically, its lowest prices, the LMP. And this year, because of the coronavirus and the drop in load, we're 30% lower than that in its first quarter. So the energy market from a consumer perspective has been working and getting competition, and we have all these resources. As I mentioned, a 26% reserve margin, great prices. And then we had this ORDC ruling, and there's a lot of uncertainty with it again, and what it's going to mean and how it's going to impact us. And I think that there's a lot of concern about that. I've been trying to get the numbers. I know that the market monitor and the protest filing that with PJM filed their energy price formation proposal said that it would cost about $1.7 billion annually for consumers from this new construct. PJM said in their filing it would be about $500 million, maybe less because of the different benefits. Consumers only do have so much money to spend, and transmission costs are going up 40%. That's where the big concern is where is this going to lead to, with transmission costs going up 40% over the last 5 years, and this kind of going up in capacity MOPR, not knowing it. You have 3 huge cost increases potentially, and no one knows because capacity performance was supposed to increase, and it wasn't because of the competitive market framework. So it's definitely a big concern for the states right now.
Terrific. Kent, anything there in Kentucky on the topic?
Yeah, I would just say it's sort of indicative. Over the last few years, PJM has made a determination effectively that prices are too low, right? I was rereading one of their MOPR, I think the jump ball filing last night, and it was a complaint that people aren't getting the right price signals. I think that I have a concern that PJM has seen low prices in PJM as a problem. But I think the price signals are fine because entry continues to outpace exit, right? I think people are getting the right price signals. There are just certain market participants that may not necessarily like them. So I would just ask PJM to take a step back and take a more of a holistic view that maybe low prices are not always indicative of problems.
Thanks. I think I'm getting the hook, but I feel bad if I don't give Asim the last word here on ORDC and how long PJM thinks that's going to take to work that out.
Yeah, so we've got compliance obligations under the reserve pricing filing as well. The only thing I wanted to point out is there is this linkage between the capacity market and energy and ancillary services. Part of what the order from the FERC said is that within 45 days of the order, we need to file a revised methodology for this concept of E and AS offset, energy and ancillary services offset. The sort of theory being that the generator's got kind of a revenue requirement, and if they're going to be receiving more in the energy market, how does that then impact revenue on the capacity side? So there is that linkage there. As far as the policy associated with ORDC, frankly, the entire endeavor was before my time at PJM. But there's some operational interesting perspectives to be discussed, and is certainly worthwhile of its own panel, but appreciate the opportunity just to discuss that quick linkage back to the capacity market and MOPR.
Thank you very much. Awesome. Thank you for your input throughout this this hour. I think we're at our limit. Commissioner Richard, I'm not going to give you an opportunity on this question. Hopefully, again, you'll forgive me. Kent, fantastic. Thanks for arriving and supporting Kentucky's needs here. And of course, Greg, I look forward to seeing you at the CTC again on a regular basis. So thank you very much. WEA is going to provide links to material that may be of relevance to this session. And I think that's about it for me. Thank you.